Mr. Fantastic, also known as Reed Richards, showed a genius-level intellect at a very young age. He started attending college at the age 14, and by age 20, he had 4 degrees in math, physics, and engineering. Later in his life, Reed joined the military. During a test run while working on a starship, he was exposed to almost lethal doses of cosmic radiation. The team of 4 that Reed was a part of was forced to return to Earth and crash their spacecraft. When they woke up, they found that their bodies had mutated. Reed discovered that he could reshape any part of his body at will, almost like becoming elastic. He suggested that the 4, now mutant scientists, create the Fantastic Four, with Reed as their leader. Taking a look at the science behind Reed's powers, it is easier to understand how they came to be and how he uses them to fight crime with the rest of the Fantastic Four. One of the powers Mr. Fantastic has is the power of elasticity. We can assume that the cosmic rays Mr. Fantastic was exposed to changed the polymers he was made up of into synthetic elastic polymers called elastomers. The molecules in an elastic are regularly coiled, but with the application of force, they straighten out into the direction they are being pulled, and when released, they return to their original form. The cosmic rays would have also rearranged his polymers to be in a disordered state, so they have the ability to stretch out like the molecules in elastic substances do. It would also cause his polymers to be cross-linked by covalent bonds, joining them into a single networked molecule. Mr. Fantastic can stretch up to 1,500 feet before reaching his elastic limit. When a substance reaches its elastic limit, that means the polymers start to become glassy, or freeze in state, and will no longer act as an elastic. Likewise, if Mr. Fantastic tries to stretch past this limit, he temporarily loses his powers. In addition to his elasticity, Mr. Fantastic can also resist electricity. The chemistry behind electrical resistance is that the resistance property of an electric circuit transforms electrical energy into heat energy. When electric current goes through Mr. Fantastic's body, the electrons within him and his molecules are converting electrical energy into heat energy, hindering the electrons, thus creating a resistance to electricity.
Cosmic rays are high-energy protons and atomic nuclei that travel at 299,792,458 meters per second, or the speed of light. At this velocity, they are able to travel great distances and can cause radiation poisoning and damage if the particles hit a human's atoms. Because of their high velocity, having lead blocking may actually be more dangerous than no protection. When the cosmic rays hit the lead nuclei split, which leads to more nuclei splitting, and ultimately the human atoms being hit by the cosmic particles. This is what happened to Reed, and what allowed him to become elastic. Elasticity is the ability of an object to assume its natural, normal shape after being compressed. Reed's many abilities can include morphing into a bouncy ball-like shape and morphing into a parachute. Reed can morph his body into a parachute. This means the polymers in his body will extend to create a canopy that will increase drag or increase the effect of air resistance on Reed's body. Air resistance is a resistance the gas molecules in Earth's atmosphere have on objects in freefall. Terminal velocity is very important to factor in when assessing a parachute's effectiveness. An object's acceleration is around 9.8 meters per second squared. When the force of air resistance pushing an object up and the force of gravity pulling it down equal out, the term terminal velocity takes precedence. Without a parachute, a human's terminal velocity is too fast to survive a fall from a plane, but a parachute slows down the person to about 5 meters per second. Reed's canopy slows his body down enough to survive falls even from great heights.
Mr. Fantastic's physiology is scientifically impossible within the boundaries of anatomical science, but that doesn't mean it isn't understandable. Mr. Fantastic's skeletal, joint, and muscular structures, when examined in relation to those of a normal human, appear profoundly different. Mr. Fantastic's eccentric muscle contraction, coupled with sliding filament theory, is the most vital part of scientifically understanding his superpowers, as well as his apparent lack of any sort of normal appendicular skeletal system and his abnormal abilities for joint rotation on multiple sites. When examining Mr. Fantastic from an exercise science lens, the most important feature is analyzing how his eccentric muscle contraction could work with sliding filament theory. In short, Mr. Fantastic would not necessarily have a greater amount of fascicles and myofibrils because his arms don't get infinitesimally small when stretched. Rather, the number of muscle cells would just be much, much greater than the average person. His actin and myosin filaments would, however, behave in the same way with neuromuscular function during muscle contraction, especially eccentric. Moreover, Mr. Fantastic's power enables any synovial joint in his body to perform a full range of rotation, supination, and pronation during eccentric contraction. This would allow for not only his elasticity, but also his ability to control his joints during eccentric contraction. Mr. Fantastic would also need to have a high density of motor neurons, bundled as motor pools, at each axon terminal site throughout his body. This density would, unlike most humans, need to remain fairly constant, given that he has a profound degree of accuracy surrounding every joint movement.
Specifically adding on to Hayden's portion about exercise science, we will now be calculating the mathematical significance of Mr. Fantastic's ability. In order to do this, we found the average volume of a human male, which was about 3,785 cubic inches. Based off of the Marvel website, Mr. Fantastic can stretch up to 1,500 feet. For his exact measurements, Mr. Fantastic is 6 feet and 1 inch and weighs approximately 180 pounds. After dividing his height of 6'1" by his maximum stretch length of 1,500 feet, it was found that Mr. Fantastic could stretch to about 250 times his original length. When in his normal form, Mr. Fantastic's density is 30 pounds per square foot. Due to the law of the conservation of mass, Mr. Fantastic's total weight must remain constant before and after using his superpowers. When dividing his normal density by his maximum amount of stretch, which was 250 times his original length, it ultimately equated to 0.12 pounds per square foot of his body. This extremely wide range of motion of his body would mean that his joints would become all but irrelevant. This means that all joints, bones, muscles, or any other part of his body can move eccentrically, concentrically, isometrically, or in any other way, shape, or form.
We can assume the cosmic rays caused a mutation in Reed's DNA which allowed his cells to become elastic. We can also assume that the cosmic rays had an effect on Reed's connective tissue. Connective tissue, which connects other tissues with organs, is used to stretch and made of fibroblasts. These fibroblasts are the cells responsible for synthesizing proteins that form an extracellular matrix, which is a network of collagen and other proteins that support the cells around them. It is likely that the cosmic rays enhanced the function of Reed's fibroblasts, allowing him to stretch further distances. Fibroblasts are also used to repair open wounds and synthesize more proteins. If these fibroblasts can grow in order to help to repair wounds, it is logical that their growth allows Reed to stretch. Fibroblasts are able to change shape by reforming their cytoskeleton in order to adapt to the tension that is placed on them. When this connective tissue is stretched, it is able to hold its shape due to the properties of the fibroblasts. However, Reed is not able to hold a shape for long, implying that the cosmic rays allowed his fibroblasts and connective tissues to stretch further, but also implying that the cosmic rays made it so that his connective tissue is not able to hold its shape.
Regardless of his vast intellect and superhuman powers, Mr. Fantastic hardly shows any remote hints of computer scientific coloration as a character throughout the comic books and TV shows of the official Marvel canon. However, when it comes to Mr. Fantastic's portrayal in Hollywood movies, his role is somewhat directed around computer scientific themes. For example, in all of the different Fantastic Four movies, specifically the scenes where Mr. Fantastic uses his powers, all of them were accomplished through the use of computer-generated images, otherwise known as CGI. According to Ron Fedrick, an associate professor of computer science at Stanford University, computer-generated images are produced through math and science-based algorithms. They are transferred through computer processors. This means that Mr. Fantastic's visual effects are processed and rendered through complex lines of code. Perhaps the most elusive example of computer science intervention with Mr. Fantastic's character is when, in one of the scenes of Fantastic Four, 2015, Reed Richards uses his powers to take the appearance of someone else. To implement this into the movie, visual effect artists had to use digital doubles, which are copies of real-life humans rendered through computer-generated imagery that are usually made for virtual edits to an individual's face. They did this to shift the face of Reed Richards' actor into that of another person. Specifically, when in use, digital doubles take the faces of both actors and use slow animation to blend in and animate the process of morphing their faces. Some parts of Reed Richards' face weren't able to shift, such as the detail of his hair, which resulted in a full CG implant.
On screen, Mr. Fantastic's powers appear incomprehensible. However, by analyzing said powers scientifically, one can adequately make sense of how his body functions. By using an intertwined research method of his powers as they relate to chemistry, biology, physics, computer science, and exercise science, Mr. Fantastic becomes a lot more than just a cool, stretchy superhero on a screen. He becomes, rather, a scientific phenomenon.
Here we have included our works cited